Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Trustcast Show. And we're really happy to have with us James Quigley. Welcome to the show, James.
Thank you, Zane. Glad to be here. Thank you.
So, James Quigley was adopted at 4 months old. He grew up in small town Wisconsin and went on to become one of only 100 divorce trial lawyers in the country selected for American College of Family Trial Lawyers. Today, he's an equity partner at Chicago's largest divorce only family law firm, and he's represented Michael Jordan, and he's founded sports and entertainment division that handles some of the most high profile, high stakes divorces in Illinois. So you were born Frank Anthony Balastriari in
That's
Green
good.
Bay, placed for adoption through Catholic Charities at 4 months old, and raised as James Quigley. How did growing up? So you knew this from a very early age that you were adopted?
Yep. I always knew that I was adopted, and it was kind of a journey over uh, really in my late teens and into my early adult where I kind of figured out the connectivity to my birth parents. But yeah, I always knew I was adopted from a very early age.
And how did that impact you growing up? Adopted the way maybe that you see families today, or did it?
Well, I think in many respects, it was a true blessing, and I don't believe I'd be where I am today without that opportunity. I was afforded life and adopted into an amazing family, and was raised with kind of traditional values in a small town, and I think that gave me the opportunity to expand my horizons and my visions, and it kind of landed me where I am today. So I'm very grateful for that whole experience and possibilities.
So you went to Wisconsin you got your journalism degree, and then you pivoted from storytelling to law school at DePaul. Was that always the plan, or did it just kind of evolve that way?
Kind of evolved. And it's funny about the storytelling because I suppose that's what we do as lawyers, especially when we're doing our closing arguments and so forth at trial. But no, it was I'd actually wanted to get into sports broadcasting, and my only training for that in college was playing a lot of sports, intramurals, and so forth. And so I didn't have the proper training to really make that my career. And so a buddy of mine said, "Well, you ought to go to law school." So seemed like a good idea. Bought me some more time, and it just kind of evolved from there, to be honest.
So your first legal job was running a family law department for the Fraternal Order of Police. What did divorcing cops, which I imagine there's quite a few, and firefighters teach you about that job? I mean, is it statistically, isn't that a higher amount of divorces in that particular profession, or is that not true?
You know, I don't know for certain. My experience over 35 years now would suggest that, you know, the percentages are in every marriage that there's that possibility. But what it taught me was really how to just understand the process. In other words, doing family law work in Cook County, Lake County, DuPage County, some of the primary counties around Chicago, gave me a sense of how it works, or in some respects, how it doesn't work. So it gave me the early skill set of being able to deal with a lot of personality types, a variety of, um, you know, uh, factual disputes, but also getting really to get my feet wet as a litigator, get in the courtroom, get to know the judges, the players in our world, so to speak. So it really, really just immersed me into the divorce world in a very real way. That that those experiences were, you can't really get those elsewhere as a young person. And so I was kind of thrust into a lot of activity very early on and learned a great deal. It was a great
Mhm.
experience.
So then you went out and you started Quigley and Associates on your own. So what pushed you out of working in that sort of scenario to going out on your own?
Well,
How old were you when you did that?
oh boy. So probably, let's see, I graduated law school in 92, and the gentleman I worked for where we represented the police union, Tom Toohey and Associates, that was probably through 93. And then I actually worked for a gentleman who's now one of my partners, Enrico Mirabelli. So about 95, 96. So I'd imagine I was getting close to 30 years of age, give or take. And that was when I said I'm going out on my own.
then you end up at the biggest divorce firm, really maybe in the country, but obviously in Illinois, but maybe in the country. How did that happen? Going from and what sort of, was that a culture shock, or could you do what you were doing before at Quigley and Associates as you can at uh, at the larger law firm?
Yeah, great question. So the way it came to be is just practicing with my own firm. I ended up having a couple of attorneys working for me. We were growing. I was building a bit of a reputation within the family law courts. And at that point in time, Beermann had a need for someone kind of my experience level. And so after some, robust negotiations back and forth, we agreed to terms, and I moved over. And so at the time, we were not the largest family law firm. In fact, in 2005 is when I went over. 2005, the firm was multidisciplined. We had a litigation department, a corporate department, estate planning, personal injury, real estate. It was very well rounded, but the primary part of the firm was divorce and family law. And we had probably at that time less than 25 lawyers. So we've more than doubled since then. And it was, I knew I had to, I think, have some weight behind, what I was building. I certainly needed the resources of a large firm. As a divorce practitioner, you realize very quickly, if you have business and you have high level business, it is very, very difficult to manage without a robust team and resources. And so I knew I needed that, and I knew it would grow my reputation. So as far as the culture shift, it was, part of why I chose Beermann is because the people that were there. And I knew culturally I wanted people that understood me and I understood how they worked. I had cases with them and I had a great deal of respect for how they comported themselves as professionals, and the quality that they put out. So I wanted to be part of that. And so, and as long as they understood, I'm not a guy that's a real rigid. I don't do well on a fixed schedule. I said, I'll do my part. And they said, oh, hey, we understand. And they brought me in and let me be my thing. So do my thing. And so it's really, really been, it's really been a great transition for me, and really has boosted my career.
So you talk about, or you were talking just a minute ago about the resources of running a family law practice. So let's compare before, when you were running a small practice with a few lawyers, versus now. What were the financial pressures that you'd have to deal with that maybe would limit your ability to represent your client in the way that you'd like to?
Yeah. Well, when you're a small business owner, you're a small business owner. It's a business and you have to run the business. It's not always just about servicing the clients. You have to deal with staffing issues. You have to deal with paying bills. You have to deal with getting the bills out. We didn't have the luxury in my small office that we have now. We have a billing department and you have an office manager and HR and all of those kind of things that are just taken care of. And so that was always a challenge in terms of the time. There's only so many hours in a day when you can do those other things. And that was a big decision, a big part of my decision in terms of going to a larger firm. But also it was how you're able to manage clients. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for sole practitioners and small business owners because I know the amount of grind that goes into it. But for me, it was a situation of how do you allocate your time? And if you have clients that require a lot of themselves time, but also the litigation is very involved. And then imagine being a trial lawyer. You could be in court literally all day, every day for a couple of weeks at a time.
Right.
And, who's managing the ship, so to speak, when you're gone. And I just realized that as I grew, I just needed certain people, really good people, to fill in those gaps so that I could focus on what I'm really good at.
So you founded Beerman Sports and Entertainment Division after representing Michael Jordan. Walk me through how that came about, how you ended up representing Michael Jordan, and then how you decided, you know what, we need to have this separate division within our firm.
Yeah, it was, man, in my career, nothing has compared. And I was fortunate at the time, our senior partner, our founding partner, Miles Beermann, approached me one day. I was on trial with a couple of partners, and it was a lengthy trial. And he came to me and he said, Quiggs, he said, I need you in a meeting tomorrow. And I said, well, Miles, I'm in the middle of a pretty big trial. It was a custody relocation case, very involved. And he said, Quiggs, you got to be there. So I went to my other two partners, said, guys, you're going to have to run the trial tomorrow. Miles needs me. He goes, I'll call you.
Just suddenly here's the file. There, just jump in there and do the best you can.
Well, and that's again to the point of how we run our firm and having a team. It was seamless. I had at the time a junior partner, Shanna Vitek, who's now one of my equity partners. She had been with me since law school.
Yep.
And I knew what she was capable of, but in that particular trial, she had been more of a supporting role to myself and another partner of mine. And so I said, Shanna, you've got this witness. It's fine. And it did. And we won the trial. And that was great. But Miles called me that evening because I couldn't understand what this was. He said, Quiggs, we're going to meet Michael Jordan tomorrow. And so you could imagine, as a huge basketball fan, that was just kind of on the heels of all the championships. It was like, man, this is a once in a lifetime. So it was really an amazing experience. And I learned so much about that from that
So
process.
we're having a bit of
discretion,
an issue. Hopefully,
in terms of understanding sort of the uniqueness of what celebrities and athletes and entertainers and even political figures.
We might have gotten disconnected. Hang on.
Oops.
We had a little break there. So that's why I like Riverside in particular, is that if something goes south with the internet, well, we can edit this a little bit out, but it's still recording locally on your computer and on my computer. So then it's broadcasting automatically to the cloud, because we had kind of lost you for a little bit. And I was sitting on the edge of my seat listening to, you're going to have this meeting with Michael Jordan. And then suddenly I couldn't hear you for a minute.
Okay, I'll pick up. So the next morning we went to Michael Jordan's office, the one and only time in my career that I've went to someone else's, a client's office instead of mine. And the experience was just amazing, because at that point in my career, I'd really sort of, understood. I was, in my 40s, early 40s, and really kind of had some good experiences. And I actually had something to lend. There was a lot of people involved in it, but what I really learned from that, what I understood from that process, Zane, was it's just the people are the same, whether it's Michael Jordan or anybody else. The people are the same when they're going through that process, but their worlds are different and their needs might be different. Confidentiality, discretion, it's always important in everybody, but at that level, when there's endorsements at stake and there's money attached to the name and likeness, there's a lot that goes into that. Plus, you're dealing with agents, you're dealing with accountants, you're dealing with litigation attorneys and other people. And so understanding how to work with all of the people within that world was very enlightening to me, but also understanding too, just how do you manage cases like that with discretion? The takeaway from that was we need to sort of have a special emphasis within the firm. So, in one sense, a divorce for a, world-renowned individual is really no different than the guy next door. Right. But there's nuances and there's subtleties that I think what they're part of sort of creating that niche within the firm was to help people from the outside world understand that if you fit into that world, we have that experience, number one. We understand how to manage those cases, both from the complicated financial issues, but also sort of the discretion that's required in those matters and the confidentiality. And so that was kind of the impetus of that. But it is, as you can imagine, cases like that don't come every day. Here in Chicago, I would say with our firm, if there's a high profile case, someone within my firm, it may not always be me, but one of my partners, myself, we generally are on one side of the case. And that's sort of a brand and an expertise of ours that's kind of getting out into the national world as well.
Yeah. So would you practice outside of are some of your attorneys licensed to practice in other places where you could step in a high profile divorce case or be a co-counsel, or have you done that, or is that something you've been approached with?
Yep, very much so. In fact, there was a Hall of Fame baseball player I represented out of the state of Florida. And so there's a procedure whereby, and I have a couple partners that are actually licensed in Florida, but for that particular case, there's a procedure. It's the Latin phrase pro hoc vice, which allows an attorney who's not licensed in another jurisdiction to actually practice on a given case. You have to have a local attorney who sponsors you, and there's a motion you have to file to get leave of court to be able to come in and practice in that jurisdiction for that limited case. So I have done that. Others in my office clearly have done that. And those are situations where, for example, if I'm working with an agent and an agent knows me personally, sometimes they prefer me to stay in the case because they understand the connection, the relationship between oftentimes agent and client, financial advisor, client. Sometimes you refer cases out, and the first thing the lawyer does is, hey, is your agent doing the right thing, or is your financial advisor doing the right thing? And I've got people I can introduce you to. So protecting relationships, professional relationships, trusted relationships in those kind of cases is also a big deal. That sometimes is why we stay in the case around the country.
So when you're representing a professional athlete or public figure, what's the biggest thing that most people don't understand about a celebrity or a divorce, or misunderstand about a celebrity divorce?
Well, at its core, my experience is they're just real people. You understand them in terms of how you see them on TV, how they perform on a athletic field or on screen or something like that. And so I think people, myself included, you formulate sort of your impression of who they are. When you sit down and you kind of peel the onion back and you're dealing with a divorce, you're dealing with children's issues, it's not like they're not parents and that they don't have concerns about their children and so forth. That's what you really learn. They're just human beings. And what I found really kind of interesting is I've come across with people that they're at the height of their industry. And in this instant, they're looking to me for guidance and direction because this is my court, so to speak, in my world. And so it's a tremendous amount of responsibility. I take that very seriously, regardless of whether you're famous, whether you're millionaire, billionaire, or again, the guy next door, because I grew up as the guy next door. And so I have a lot of respect for people and for families. And that's really what you see. That's kind of universal, regardless of who you represent.
So you manage a team, my research says you manage a team of a dozen lawyers or somewhere around that.
Yeah. And it's kind of, yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Zane.
No, I was just curious, how do you manage that and decide, okay, well, I'm my time's, I'm managing all this that's going on in here, and probably have your fingers in all those different pies in one way or another. But then when do you say, okay, I want to step in and handle this case myself? Or does a client say, oh, we got to have James or Quigsy? What was your nickname? Your
Quigs.
Quigs. We got to have Quigs on this one.
Yeah.
When do you jump in, and how do you manage your time with that many people kind of,
Yeah.
that you're responsible
It's
to
a
work with?
great question, and it's sort of interesting. So a little background. So the way our firm is constructed, a lot of the equity partners have, a tier of a team underneath us. So we have income partners, junior partners, we have associate attorneys, paralegals. We employ law students as law clerks to do research and writing and so forth. And so there's tiers to that. And when I say I manage a team of a dozen or more lawyers, and there's probably on my team, I don't even really call it my team, but it's the tree that I've sort of brought up. We want to promote young, law students to be good lawyers, to be great partners, and then to be equity partners. And so I've had the great pleasure within my sort of tree to have three of my attorneys that have basically come from law school and are now equity partners with the firm. And so there's they're kind of
That's
running
impressive. That's really great.
well, and to be honest, to your point about what my role is now, it's more leadership. I want to see the firm succeed. I want longevity. We've got these great young people that are hungry, and I just kind of show them the path and cheer them on a little bit, and we've had great success. But through that also, each person that goes up, they have to kind of train down And so that these young people from law school on up are getting sort of the way we do things at Beermann. There's an expectation of the work product that comes out of our office. There's an expectation of how we comport ourselves. And it's not easy in our world. Sometimes, you got to go to battle a little bit. But that has really sort of grown. And to be honest with you, Zane, my role is
little
so much
brief
different than it
interruption
was,
again.
almost 35 years ago, where I'm not scrapping through the courthouse every single day covering, routine matters and banging out
Hopefully
the
I didn't lose you.
drafts of pleadings and briefs
We're
on a
having a
computer.
little
I'm
technical
more in
challenge
leadership and
just for
delegation.
a
And of
second here.
course, with my years of trial experience, that's really my role. When we have trial
So
work, I
hang with
need
me.
counsel on my files. Yes, there are clients that say, James, I want you more involved. And I am very much involved. But a lot of my day to day is working with my team. People are coming in. It's like a revolving door. Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? I want to run something by you. And it's just this amalgamation of great legal minds and great young energy, which I feed off of, that motivates me. And, they believe it or not, they still come to me to listen every now and again, which is kind of cool.
So you've been in MSNBC, Today Show, Fox News, been quoted on People magazine. Does media coverage, I know it helps the firm, but does it help or hurt the actual case? And I guess it depends on the situation, because sometimes you're forced into it, aren't you?
Yeah, a lot of it is more commentary. Sure, I think it's brand building, which you probably can understand very well.
Yep.
In terms of any specific cases, when we represented Michael, we weren't able to speak about it, talk about it, never did. In fact, I can tell kind of a funny story on that. My former boss called me when he got the press release and he said, "Wait, what's going on? When did this happen? What can you tell me?" I said, "I can't tell you anything." He said, "Come on." He said, "Someone from the ABC reached out to me and wants an interview." I said, "I can't help you out." So he gave an interview talking about whatever he thought. And of course, none of it was anything about the specifics because it's not part of the record. And I couldn't tell him. And so I was walking across the street the following Monday and someone said, "Hey, did you see that Rico represented Michael Jordan?" I just kind of started to laugh. I said, "Well, actually he did. I saw him on ABC News." I said, "I understand." So, it's like this, you can talk about things, you can give commentary. You can't talk about specific cases or issues within cases. And it's just, I've been approached, on a number of occasions. And sometimes, my quote is, no comment. I'm sorry, I can't speak to that. But, some of the other stuff, when we would do those, it's more, I would say PR, where you're getting
Yep.
your brand out there. They recognize you as sort of, not really an expert, but someone within the industry that, who does this and has experience and, adds some value more from a color commentary type of a situation than any
Right.
specific case.
So you've written about divorcing a narcissist. How do you actually litigate against somebody who just won't play by the rules?
Yeah. Wow. Zane, that's been a hot button, I think, for the past decade or so. It started coming up just in my practice where, and again, I think it cuts both ways, but my experience have been more with women coming to me and describing a particular pattern or personality type. And so you'd hear this word narcissism all the time. And so I really kind of took a deep dive. And at the time, my associate attorney, who's now an equity partner in the firm with me, Jordan Rosenberg, I said, Jordan, let's do a little research on this. Let's take a deeper dive, look at the DSM-5 or whatever it is now. And let's understand this psychological disorder and what does it mean and what are the effects of it. And what I started to realize is you started seeing those patterns. And when those patterns arise, number one, you really understand the level of abuse that goes on. It's very, very subtle, but very sinister. I mean, growing up, we do orders of protection and you'd see the physical violence, and that's very direct and very easy to understand. The abuse of narcissism and sort of the long-term kind of drip, 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 aspect of it is very devastating and has long-term consequences on people and on families for sure. So when you get those patterns in a divorce, what I've learned is an individual, if they truly have a narcissistic personality disorder, they're not going to change. They're not going to get help because by definition, they don't think anything's wrong with themselves. And
If
so
I'm
you're left to then kind of
frozen here just
manage
for a second. I'm sure
how
you're going to come
that
back in a minute. For whatever
comes
reason,
into
we're having
play as far
a
as,
few technical
will
difficulties.
mediation
It's
work?
kind of
Will,
unusual.
can we take the traditional steps to, hey, let's be reasonable and rational? And sometimes you have to be prepared for litigation.
We're for
Zane,
whatever
did I lose
reason,
you?
this is kind of unusual, but every once in a while, today, for some reason, we're having a few,
Gosh,
connectivity issues, but that's okay. We'll just have to edit just a little bit more of it, and it's not a big deal.
sorry about
So,
that.
no, I don't know whether it's you or it's me. I think it's you.
I think so too, actually. I don't know why, because
I don't know who it is. So when you working with that kind of a thing, like a narcissistic person, and I would say it's generally the man, but not always. Sometimes it's kind of surprising that that it can be the woman. But how do you tell that story in a courtroom that successfully illustrates what's going on? Because that's really the crux of the matter,
Yeah.
isn't it?
You know what? I have one specific experience that changed my life forever. I had a woman that came in, and from day one, she started saying my husband's a narcissist. She would describe to me and my partner sort of just the abuse she suffered. And to be honest, I was a younger man. I didn't really grasp it. And so the case progressed, and we tried all of the traditional things. Let's mediate. Let's be reasonable. The guy went through lawyer after lawyer after lawyer after lawyer. And no matter what we would try to do to be reasonable, wasn't going to work. He wanted what he wanted. It was going to be his way, and that was going to be it. The judge got involved. We had what we call pretrial conferences where the judge understood the facts, said, this is what I recommend. This is how we're going to resolve this. Nope, nope, nope. He persisted. He was right. He knew what was going to happen. We went to trial in that case. And what happened in that trial moved me forever. My client got on the witness stand, and I had one of my partners, who I mentioned before, Shanna Vitek, do the direct examination of my client. I just thought, for the optics, a woman examining a woman about these very sensitive issues, I thought it would be better understood by the court. And it was so impactful, the testimony of my client, who kind of went to another place almost and was testifying as though she was reliving these experiences. And I remember the opposing counsel objecting, objection, relevance. This is, the judge, turned to him and said, counsel, sit down. Your objection's overruled. And it was like one of those moments like, whoa. And the judge turned in his chair, and he was focused on my client. I swear, Zane, you could hear a pin drop in the courtroom. You almost got choked up listening to this because it was so hard to hear. But it was in that moment that, and only in that moment, by her telling that story in that very real way, did I really grasp the magnitude of that. And that turned the case, on its head. And we got a result far better than what the judge had recommended in a pretrial conference, because the judge got it too. So, unfortunately, there's so many cases in the system. A lot of these judges don't understand all of that. They don't have the time, the bandwidth. But when you actually go to a trial and you put a trial on properly, those things, when they're understood, very, very powerful.
So you, from what I've read here, you prefer to settle, and rather than going to court. How do you convince somebody? And I understand that mentality. I think everybody's a loser when you have to end up going to court one way or another. But how do you convince someone, hey, this is a reasonable settlement, and they're dead set. No, we gotta go punish the other side. We got to go to court, and that's the only way we're going to get our pound of whatever out of this. And they're just so emotionally charged. How do you coach them down from that level to kind of, let's settle this, even if you don't really like it. This is a better deal for everybody.
Yeah. Yep. To be honest, the only way I've been able to do that through my career is just being unwavering in what I believe. And I will not tell a client what they want to hear. I will argue with clients. I will get, I don't want to say a fight with clients, but I've had some situations with clients where I believe what I believe, and I know what's going to happen if we, go to trial and certain, there's always a margin of error, but generally speaking, after this period of time, I can predict outcomes pretty well. And so where I have clients who don't want to listen to me and they don't, and that's okay. Not everybody does, or they can't. They're just not, because of, the emotional instability or whatever. I have a decision to make, and I've had to, on occasion, withdraw from cases because I don't want to be part of the train going down the track that's going to be in a wreck. And
Right.
you realize you cannot help everybody. There are cases where sometimes you do the risk reward and you say, all right, I'll go down swinging, if I believe in the cause and they, they say, listen, I understand there's an economic cost. And when people say it's the principle of it, I always remind people principle costs money. And that's how I've approached those situations. A lot of lawyers in my world, because we cannot have contingent fees, where we bill by
Mhm.
the hour. And so a lot
Right.
of lawyers view the business of being a divorce lawyer as trying cases. It's more time, it's a lot more work, it's a lot more expense. And so unfortunately, you don't always have people doing things in our world the way we do at Beermann, and within my team in particular, where it's just you have to always stay objective, even when your client and maybe even has a really, really good reason emotionally or they've been wronged. I get it. I understand the need to have your day in court. I always try to redirect those individuals to mental health professionals, work through those issues in a place professionally outside of a courtroom. But, sometimes there are those cases where I'm on the other side and they desperately want to settle. And I say to them, here's what's on the table. That is worse than your worst scenario at trial. And you are free to take that. But my recommendation, this is one of those rare instances where I believe it actually is in your best interest to go to trial, that you can only do better. And I think sometimes even going to trial against certain individuals can have a long-term benefit because of the psychology of one spouse saying to the other, you're not going to control me anymore. I'm not just going
Mhm.
to give in to your demands. And if you want to pick a fight with me ever again, there's going to be a consequence to you in that. And so there's a lot of psychology in that, but at its core, you have to be true to your clients. You have to tell them the good, the bad, and the ugly. You have to tell them they're going to spend a lot of money and then make a good reasoned decision. And in those situations where you just can't reach people, you have to make that tough professional decision to say, this is not a good working relationship and we should part ways.
So, your wife, Charisse, an OBGYN, led the search that helped you find your biological father. What
True.
was that first phone call with Frank Balastriari like?
That was it's actually kind of funny. I was in my office and what happened was, through my wife's help and my mother was very instrumental even in helping, me find my biological parents, at least who they were. So I remember dictating a letter back in the days when you do dictation and would send out a hard copy
Mhm.
letter, but from some information we had
It
from
seems so long ago, but it really wasn't.
it's true. It really wasn't, but so much has changed since
Yeah.
then. But sent a letter to, what turned out to be my grandma Katie, and I explained who I was and didn't want to disrupt anything. But I think perhaps either her brother, her son, or I didn't know who. Now I've learned to be Grandma Katie, actually was, and I said, I apologize and sent the letter. That was on Friday. Monday, my assistant calls and said, your dad's on the phone, which was unusual. My dad, we weren't get on the phone and talk to each other, especially during work hours.
Yeah.
So I thought, boy, I got a little worried. I hope nothing's wrong. And I picked up the phone. He said, hey, son, this is Frank. And then we talked for about, gee, man, 45 minutes to an hour. It was uh it was very easy, very natural. Frank is very he's a talker. And so that kind of started the connection and we said, well, let's get together and meet sometime soon. So we planned a little bit later that spring to meet and found out that Frank, after I was born, he had later gotten married and had 5 children, two of which had a restaurant in Milwaukee. So he said, let's meet at the restaurant. And so My wife packed the kids, into the minivan at that point in time. I think my fourth child, my daughter, was either not yet born or maybe just born. And so I said to my wife, I said, I'm not sure how this is going to go. Why don't you drop me off and you go hang with my sister and the kids can play with the cousins and I'll send the distress signal if it doesn't go well. And I thought I was going to sit down and meet Frank, and I met my entire Sicilian family. There must have been 20 plus people, and it was wonderful. You talk about stereotypes, the positive stereotypes of a Sicilian or Italian American family.
Yeah.
A lot of love, a lot of food, a lot of laughs. My nanny at that time, my great grandmother, was alive. She lived to be 101, and she held my hand and cried and said, we prayed for you. We always knew you'd be back, part of the family. And so it was really a positive experience. Not every adopted child has positive experience growing up or certainly in
Yeah.
connecting. So I just, again, just feel very, very blessed.
Yeah, that is a blessing. So you met your biological mother, Barbara, shortly before she passed
Yeah.
in 2015, and she was wearing a Packers shirt
Yeah.
and Chuck Taylors.
Yeah.
What did that visit mean to you?
It's I guess I've never been asked that question in terms of what it meant to me, but it meant a lot. I hope that it meant a lot for her. Again, I'm a person who, my faith is strong and I don't believe in coincidences. Things are meant to be. And I remember that, summer before we went to see her, my son, a couple of my kids were basketball players and one had a tournament that was going to be in Las Vegas towards the end of the summer. And so I was talking with my wife and Frank, and I said, we should go and actually just meet, Barbara when we get out to Vegas, because we learned she was living there. So he said, yeah, let's do it. And my wife reached out and talked to Barbara, my biological mom's sister, found out at that time, unfortunately, she had already been placed in a nursing home and she wasn't well. So the urgency with which this happened was just kind of unexpected. We went out there, and it was a very moving moment, to make that connectivity. She had the Packer T-shirt on. She had the one green lace and one yellow lace in her Chuck Taylors, and despite what, I now can look back and understand what she was going through physically. Boy, she had just an energy about her. Seeing sort of Frank and Barbara connect because they hadn't obviously been together for all those years. You could see that they truly loved each other and there was an energy there. And what I walked away from is, number one, my kids sat there for the first time ever for all that time. They were like field mice. They just sat there. It was amazing. 4 kids that age. It was amazing, but I think they understood kind of connecting these dots as to why dad has these different parents and what adoption really is. And I walked away believing that it gave Barbara some peace in terms of the decisions she's made, the choices she made, and the sacrifices she made for me. And I hope that she saw that, I did okay.
So I don't know how many people know this, but you adopted your son Giovanni in the Denny's parking lot because you didn't want him in foster care one more day.
We got, yes. That was
Tell me about
yeah.
that.
Well, my wife and I always, because of my
I'm
experience.
really starting to like you, Quiggs.
Well, I not everybody does doing what I do, but I appreciate that.
I'm sure.
No, it was like kind of an interesting, again, how things were meant to be. So we decided that we were going to explore adoption. And at the time, my oldest had been born. We had a couple of miscarriages and thought, maybe it's time to start that process. And we were linked with a birth mother through an adoption agency. And so we went on up to see mom and dad over 4th of July and came back home. And there were 2 voicemail messages, again, dating ourselves a little bit, the old, you push the button and there's a couple recorded messages.
Yep.
And the first was from the adoption agency saying, we're sorry to inform you that the mother has, changed her mind and she's going to keep the child. And so went from a gut punch to the recorder beeping again. And it's the second message. And it's the adoption agency again saying, hey, a little bit unusual, but there's been a child that's been given up for adoption. The mom came into the hospital and said, "I can't keep the child. Are you interested?" And so the timing, we weren't really planning for this for several months. And I said to Charisse, I said, "Well, should we do this?" And prayed on it. And it actually called my mom. And I said, I know I kind of gave you a hard time. Did you ever have second thoughts? And she said, "Not once." And so I said, "Okay, let's do this." And so I immediately called and, I had heard some stories about how my experience in foster care was and from my mom and in the condition I was. And I'm not saying I was mistreated, but it wasn't great. And so I said, I'm not going to have that for my son. So I called her back. I said, "How do we do this? Why do we, no, you got to do this." I said, "We're not doing that. We got to find a way." I said, I will go pick him up. I don't care. You tell me what I got to sign, what I got to do. I'm not going to leave my son. And so in that moment, I knew there had to be a way. She said, "Well, let me talk about this or call somebody and let me call you back." And so a couple hours later, she said, "Well, I did this, I did that, or whatever. And if you want, the foster family is out in the far western suburbs. We could find kind of a mid place. Let's drive out there." And so the mid place was in Schaumburg. There's a huge mall out there, and there's a Denny's right outside the mall. And that was, kind of an easy location. I said, "We'll meet you at the Denny's parking lot." And that's what we did. We packed my oldest into the car and we drove out there, and they brought Giovanni, and it was a cool moment. And I just felt good that we were getting him into the home and getting him integrated. And it was a memorable experience, and one that I'll never forget.
We're running out of time. I got a lot more questions. I got a couple pages,
Wow.
but I really enjoyed that. Thanks a lot. That was
My
terrific.
pleasure.
So uh, thanks for coming on the show. Hang with me for just a second.
Will do. Thanks, Zane.